Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking Docker.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be talking about some of the commands
Right.
that you might use every day, or that you might want to know about.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to go a little bit beyond the basics
Yeah.
and sort of
Yeah.
assume that you have a little bit of knowledge.
Yeah.
And just kind of dive into some of the things that you might not see in like a Docker for Dummies tutorial or something.
Yeah. So this is like the
A Docker
for developers who already sort of know.
Exactly.
Exactly. We're going to assume you know how to do a Docker run.
Right.
We're going to assume you know how to build a Docker file.
Right.
All that basic stuff.
Yeah.
So
we're going to be referencing some excerpts
yeah,
from a Docker guide that we have.
exactly. We'll be looking at some different commands and concepts.
Right. So what's the first command that comes to mind for you when you think of efficiency and resource management in Docker?
Well, you know what? I'm sure a lot of people have heard of this command, but I think it's worth revisiting, which is the Docker system prunes a command.
Okay, so this is sort of like the Marie Kondoing your system, getting rid of all the unused images and containers.
It's exactly that. You get all these dangling images. You get all these exited containers, and this command just cleans everything up.
Yeah. But I think it's even more than that. What about production environments?
Exactly.
Where you really have to worry about image bloat and all that.
Yeah, think about it, unused images, unused containers, and even networks, too, can actually really add up over time.
Right.
And that takes up valuable disk space. It can impact performance and, it can even introduce security risks in some cases.
Yeah, it makes your whole Docker system less performant.
Exactly.
Right. You want to keep it nice and lean.
Yeah.
You want to keep it very performant.
Exactly. So Docker system prune is like your first line of defense.
Exactly.
To keep your system running well.
That's right.
Now, what about actually working within a container?
Right.
I'm thinking about situations where you might need to, run commands within a specific directory inside the container.
Right. So you're talking about, maybe you have your local files.
Right.
You want to actually interact with those files from inside the container environment.
Right.
That's where the Docker run command comes in.
Okay.
With a few extra flags. So you do Docker run rm-v pwd.app-w app, and then your image and your command.
Okay, so this is kind of a long one, but
it is, but
break it down for me.
But it's really powerful. So the botcharon flag means that the container is automatically removed after it exits.
Okay.
So you're not cluttering up your system with a bunch of stopped containers.
Right.
The botchawa v pwd.app part, that's where the magic happens. This is called a mounted volume.
Oh, okay.
What it does is it takes your current working directory, which is represented by pwd,
got it,
and it mounts it into the container at the app directory.
Okay.
So essentially, you're creating a live connection between your local files
got it,
and the container's file system.
So instead of manually copying things back and forth, I can use this.
You don't have to do that.
One command.
And the dashpan app flag simply sets the working directory inside the container to app so that when the command you specify runs, it's executed within the context of your mounted volume.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It's a lot.
But it's very useful.
But once you understand it, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Especially for developers who want to have that, seamless workflow between their local development environment and the container environment.
Absolutely. It's like a superpower for development and testing.
It is. It really is.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Docker files.
Right.
These are the blueprints for building Docker images.
Exactly.
And there are some commands in Docker files that give you a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, and power.
There are. One that comes to mind is ARG.
Okay.
Name, and then optionally an equal sign with a default value in brackets.
I've seen this before.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I've never really gotten into it. What are these build arguments?
So build arguments,
What are they?
They're basically parameters that you can set during the build process.
Okay.
So instead of hard coding values in your Docker file, you can use arguments to make it more dynamic.
Got it.
And customizable.
So it makes my Docker files more flexible and adaptable to different situations.
Exactly. Like let's say you want to build an image with different versions of a software library.
Okay.
You could use a build argument to specify the version during the build.
So that you don't have to create separate Docker files for each version.
So this is really good for avoiding redundancy.
It's all about avoiding redundancy, keeping your Docker files clean.
Keeping it
streamlining the build process.
dry.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't repeat yourself.
Exactly.
Now there's another command I keep seeing.
Okay.
It looks kind of complex to me, but it's from base image AS stage name.
Right.
What's that all about?
So that's multi-stage builds.
Multi-stage build.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Right.
So imagine you're building a Node.js application.
Okay. I'm picturing like a web app that needs all sorts of tools and dependencies to like...
Exactly.
Right. You need your compilers, you need your linters, you need all that stuff.
Right.
But when you deploy to production, you don't need all that stuff.
You just need the
bare minimum.
Yeah, the bare minimum.
To run your application.
And that's where multi-stage builds come in.
Oh.
They allow you to essentially have multiple stages in your Docker file.
So instead of like one giant Docker file, I can have like stages.
You break it down into stages.
Dedicated to different purposes.
Exactly. So you might have a stage for compiling your code.
Okay. Another
stage for testing. And then a final stage for creating your production-ready image.
Okay, and this final image would only contain...
That final image will only contain...
Yes.
Absolutely. Unnecessary layers.
Yeah.
As you go through the build process.
Wow.
And this has a bunch of benefits.
Okay.
First of all, your final image is much smaller.
Okay, so...
Which means faster downloads. More efficient, less storage space.
Right.
And it's also more secure because you're not including a bunch of unnecessary tools and libraries that could potentially have vulnerabilities.
Right.
So it's smaller, it's faster, it's more secure.
Yeah. So multi-stage builds are a really powerful way to like...
They are.
Optimize Docker images.
They are.
Both development and...
For both dev and prod.
And production.
Exactly.
So you're streamlining your development process.
Right.
But you're also making sure that your production environment is as efficient and secure as possible.
Exactly.
This is really cool.
It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get it now.
Good.
I think.
Good.
I think. So we've talked about these Docker file commands and how we can make our images smaller and more efficient.
Right.
But what about Docker networking?
Ah, yes.
This is a whole other beast, right?
It's a whole other world. Yeah.
Like, I feel like people get really intimidated.
Yeah, it can be a little daunting.
Like Docker networking.
It can be.
What are some of the, like, key concepts?
Well, I think the core concept is actually pretty simple.
Okay.
It's all about enabling communication between your containers and the outside world. So it's like my own little...
Yeah, it's like setting up a miniature...
Internet
within your Docker environment.
Docker.
Exactly. Each container can have its own IP address.
Okay.
And they can talk to each other.
Right.
Just like computers on a regular network.
Right.
And you can create custom networks.
Okay.
Using the Docker network command.
Okay.
Specifically Docker network create, and then you give it a driver and a network name.
Okay, so I can create custom networks instead of relying on just like Docker's default.
Exactly. You don't have to rely on the default. You can create your own isolated networks for different purposes.
What would be like a good reason to do that?
Well, think about security.
Okay.
You might want to isolate your database container.
Yeah. From other parts of your application.
Right.
You know, for security reasons.
Right. So I want to...
Put up some walls.
I might have a network for your front end.
Right.
And a network for your back end.
Right.
And you want to control the communication between them.
So it's about like managing...
It's all about managing that communication.
Information flows between my Docker containers.
Exactly. And the driver that you choose for your network plays a big role here.
Okay.
So, for example, the default driver is called Bridge. And that's good for basic container-to-container communication on the same host.
What about if I have containers running on different hosts and I need them to talk?
Ah, that's where you'd use something like the overlay driver.
Okay.
Which creates a virtual network that spans across multiple hosts.
Okay, that sounds like a...
So your containers can talk to each other.
Yeah. Much more complex situation.
It is more complex.
But a lot more powerful, too. But it's incredibly powerful for things like distributed applications and microservices, you know, where you have containers running on different machines.
Are there any other commands that you use when you're, like, trying to understand?
Oh, yeah, there are a bunch.
Or manage your Docker networks?
One that I use all the time is Docker events.
Docker events, what does that do?
So this gives you a real-time stream of events happening within your Docker environment.
So I could see like containers being created.
Exactly. You can see containers being created.
Started,
stopped, all sorts of events
Okay.
related to images, networks, the whole 9 yards.
So this is kind of like my window into...
It's like a live feed.
All the activity
going on.
Yeah.
And I can use that for like...
You could use it for monitoring, debugging, even triggering automated actions.
Wow.
Based on specific events.
Okay, cool.
And then another one that's really useful for understanding images
is Docker history.
Okay.
And then the no trunk flag.
Okay.
And then the image name.
I've seen that command.
Yeah.
But I never really knew what it did.
So what this does is it shows you the layers that make up an image.
Okay.
So you can see the entire build history.
So each layer represents...
Yeah, each layer represents a change that was made during the build process.
So like adding a file.
And installing a package.
Running a command.
All that stuff.
Okay.
So you can really see how the image was constructed.
So it's like a forensic...
Yeah, it's like a forensic
analysis.
The Docker image.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And you can use that to understand the contents of the image.
Okay.
You can debug build issues.
Right.
And you can even use it to identify potential security vulnerabilities.
So if I really want to understand...
So if you want to go deep...
how an image works...
Yeah.
This is the command.
That's the command?
To use.
That's the one to use?
Yeah.
Wow. We've gone over a lot of different commands today.
We have.
It's really interesting to see how much Docker can do.
Yeah. It's a very powerful tool.
You know, we talked about Docker files. We talked about networking. We talked about some essential commands.
Right.
Like Docker system prune.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to get a sense of, you know, the power and flexibility that Docker offers.
It really is a game changer.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about knowing the commands. It's about understanding the why behind the commands.
Right.
And how they all fit together.
Yeah. It's like learning a new language, right?
It is. It is.
Like you need to know the grammar.
The syntax.
Yeah. And the syntax.
But the real magic is when you can actually use that language to express yourself.
To build something.
To build something new, to solve problems.
Right.
So Docker provides the tools. Right. But it's up to you to use those tools to create something amazing.
To solve problems that you're facing.
Yeah.
So for someone just starting out with Docker, what advice would you give them?
I would say don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
You know, start with simple examples, break things, learn from your mistakes.
Okay.
The Docker community is incredibly supportive.
Right.
So don't hesitate to ask questions. Seek help when you need it.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
Because I think...
it's easy to get overwhelmed.
You get really overwhelmed by the power of Docker.
It is a lot to take in.
And just thinking about all the things you could do.
Right.
But, you know, just starting small.
Start small, yeah.
Experimenting.
Yeah, experiment.
Yeah.
And remember, Docker is always evolving.
It's true.
New features are being added all the time, so... stay curious.
Yes, stay curious.
Keep learning.
That's the beauty of technology, right?
It is.
It's a never-ending...
it's a journey.
Of learning and figuring things out.
And with Docker... the possibilities are really limitless.
Well, thanks for joining us today on our deep dive into the world of Docker.
My pleasure.
I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did too.
Yeah, me too.
And, you know, if you're interested in learning more about Docker, there are a ton of resources available online.
Absolutely.
So go check them out and see what you can build.
Yeah, happy Dockering, everyone.
Happy Dockering.